terrifying explosions.
It's a terrifying scene.
Crumbling right before your eyes.
That lady still in there?
It's one of the scariest scenarios out there.
Women with deadly intentions.
Does everybody want to die today?
Got shots fired up here.
She's armed and dangerous.
And she knows how to use it.
Frightening viral videos that will leave your jaw on the ground.
This scene is unbelievable.
Blow this bitch up.
Situations like this can escalate and really quickly.
Open the day.
She's making demands. There's no calming this person down.
December 4th, 2018, Garland, Texas. It's business as usual at a local bank until one customer suddenly loses her cool.
No, tell him.
You can hear sort of the desperation in her voice.
No, tell him.
She was obviously on edge.
I'm not a joke. This is not a game.
She's clearly asking for something that's not being given to her.
People start recording on their phones as the woman's rant turns ominous.
I'm gonna blow this bitch up and everybody in this. I'm not a joke.
Now it's become a terrorist threat.
The person who is trying to help in this situation is trying to de-escalate what's happening.
It doesn't work. This woman is not playing.
Open the safe. Open the safe. I'm here to rob this.
There's no calming this person down. She is demanding money over and over again.
An employee frantically calls for help.
Terrorists claiming to rob us.
Open the safe.
Watching this woman, you just wonder, what does it take for a person to get to this level where they're walking into a bank, demanding the safe be open?
Does everybody want to die today?
Is this woman to be taken seriously? Is she hiding a weapon? Brave customers step in to assist with the volatile situation.
This don't concern me. This doesn't matter. This is not your fight. I'm broke and I need some money. That's what y'all need to do is open up the safe.
She's making demands. She's talking about a personal situation, things that she wants. You can make demands of anything that you want. It's just a matter of who's on the other side and how are they going to respond to this.
I'm broke and I need some money because I need some money. Y'all don't understand that I need money right now. I'm gonna blow this bitch up and everybody in this.
Does she really think that just by making threats and threatening to bomb the place, essentially, and everyone inside of it, that is going to force them to open up the safe?
The woman is having a full-on tantrum.
I need some money right now. Right now.
She is there on a mission, trying to get something, but it's not working very well.
After 5 minutes, the employee who has been patiently trying to control her manages to guide her out of the bank.
He really kept everyone calm, which is important in this situation.
I'm gonna blow this bitch up and everybody in this.
And it turns out her scary threats were nothing but talk.
The only weapon she has is her purse.
Video of the wild outburst goes viral with millions of views. And there are plenty of comments from people who say they relate to her desperate pleas.
Watching this video, it feels like you could be this woman. Everyone is dealing with money problems. We have a recession. You know, you're trying to buy eggs, and it just feels like I'm just gonna go to a bank and I want them to give me money.
Open the safe. Why don't they listen?
She's really lucky things didn't turn violent. She's really lucky that the security officer that was working that day is the one that she got.
Please, I need some money.
The woman, Katie Johnson, is arrested and charged with bank robbery. She's sentenced to 36 months.
What? I need the money.
Thankfully, in this situation, no one was injured, and the outcome was as positive as it could be.
Please, I need the money right now.
But you won't believe the outcome of this next shocking viral video.
This Virginia home reduced to rubble.
Massive home explosion.
It was really traumatizing. Something out of an action movie.
December 4th, 2023, Arlington, Virginia.
It's Northern Virginia, a very high-end area outside of D.C., very expensive, nice homes.
Emily Saxon has lived here for just a few months.
It's a very quiet little corner of Arlington. It's kind of off the main drag of all the bars and restaurants.
She's looking forward to getting home after a busy workday as a nurse when she sees something shocking.
There was local news that was reporting that there was a man in the neighborhood who was sending flare signals outside of his window.
A police officer just so happened to be sitting there when he noticed flares going up.
When Emily gets to her neighborhood, there's a flurry of commotion at a house a block away from hers.
The person inside not cooperating, refusing to come outside. SWAT is brought in. You're thinking, what is this going to be, a shootout? Do they have firearms? Do they have other explosives that are more lethal than just the flare?
Emily decides to stay inside her house, where she believes she'll be safe.
It was really scary. Everyone that lives on that street felt panic.
The intense standoff with the barricaded man goes on for more than 3 hours, when
What's most disturbing about this story is this could really happen anywhere.
December 4th, 2023, a 3-hour standoff with police ends when a house in Arlington, Virginia is violently torn apart in a powerful explosion.
Initially, I'm thinking this has got to be like a gas leak or something.
When I felt it, I was laying back on my couch and I physically recoiled forward and like my book fell out of my hand.
Emily nervously walks outside to find out what's happened.
I round the corner and I see the mushroom cloud explosion fire. And I just see a swarm of people outside. The whole neighborhood was just, I think, in a state of shock.
Now, Emily is terrified.
That's like something just crumbling right before your eyes. What if a second blast happens?
Luckily, it doesn't. And after a tense night, police hold a press conference to reassure everyone.
There's no ongoing threat to the community related to this incident.
They also identify the man as the owner of the house, 56-year-old James Yu. He's presumed dead. They are still investigating, but Yu is someone who was on their radar.
The individual had previously communicated with the FBI via phone calls, online tips, and letters over a number of years. Primarily complaints about alleged frauds he believed were perpetrated against him.
A paranoid individual who had been calling the FBI and making complaints for an extended period of time.
The cause of the explosion is still unknown. The fire department had turned the gas off, and officials were exercising caution as they tried to coax the suspect out.
Officers began to deploy non-flammable, less lethal chemical munitions to multiple areas in hopes of compelling the suspect to surrender.
What's perplexing about this situation is we'll probably never know what the true intention of the suspect was.
The explosive video quickly goes viral.
Let's get to that massive home explosion in Virginia that happened as police tried to talk a barricaded man out.
And the ordeal leaves Emily shaken.
For it to get so viral and then for it to be global news, for it to happen in this seemingly like perfect neighborhood. The whole message was really that you just never know who your neighbors are. Everyone is a stranger.
Across the country in Texas, a driver plows into a suburban house, trapping the homeowners inside.
Officers were approaching the home when it exploded.
I just remember a big heat wave.
The terrifying scene.
It's one of the scariest scenarios out there.
April 7th, 2018, Hurst, Texas. A peaceful Saturday is about to be shattered.
You have a family inside their home. You have to think that's the safest place you can be. Then a car crashes into the home.
Hurst 911.
A truck just ran into my house. It's in my house.
All right, I'm going to be getting some help out that way, but you're not hurt?
No, but I'm trapped in the corner of my room.
The 61-year-old cowers inside the room where the truck slammed into the house. Her terror made worse by not knowing what has happened to her husband or adult son, who were also home. When officers pull up a few minutes later, something seems off.
You see the driver standing very calmly off to the side.
Officer Travis Heiser immediately steps out to investigate.
If he had gotten out there 2 minutes earlier, he would have been blown up.
Are you all right? 222 Hurst, you copy that? We had explosion in the house. You okay? Yeah.
This was not a tiny explosion. This was a massive explosion. You can see the roof of the house blowing off.
As they get their bearings, officers panic.
That lady still in there? Is the caller still in there? She's in there? Get back away from the house! Back! Come on! I'm coming! Hey, medics in the back! Someone's in the back!
Officers find the couple's dazed son at the back of the home. When they rescue his parents, his dad is covered in soot, and his mom is frantic.
My dog!
Moments later, the family dog is also pulled to safety. Emergency calls flood in from concerned neighbors.
Hurst 911.
Yeah, I think a house exploded. Hurst 911. I heard like the horrible loud boom. Yeah, we're taking care of it. We got it under control.
With everyone out of the house and the fire department handling the blaze, police turn their attention to the driver of the truck.
Did you hit your head when you had this accident? When you crashed, did you hit your head?
Alejandro Castro tells police his brakes fail, but then confesses that he's been drinking.
What did you drink?
Oh, look, me?
Yes.
Me?
Yes.
2 drinks, 3 drinks.
About an hour ago, or what?
1 hour, yeah.
Castro passes a field sobriety test, but he has a previous conviction for driving while intoxicated.
You don't have a Texas driver's license or anything?
I don't know. No.
There are questions about whether he should have even been driving at all.
He's arrested, then transferred to federal custody on an immigration hold. It turns out that when the SUV careened into the house, it ruptured a gas line.
99.9% of the time, gas lines do exactly what they're supposed to do. But there are cases where they will cause an entire home to go up in a fireball in a split second. It's one of the scariest scenarios out there.
In fact, the mother suffers second-degree burns to 30% of her body. Incredibly, everyone else, including the family dog, survives.
This family is lucky that they got out alive, but they still suffered tremendous loss.
As for the first responders, several have to be treated for minor injuries. Officer Heiser tells reporters it's a miracle nobody died.
There was definitely some divine intervention that was reaching down. Otherwise, it would have exploded completely into my face.
Video of the frightening explosion goes viral.
What's so scary about this is how quickly circumstances in life can change. In 1 second, in the middle of a Saturday, their entire world changed.
Coming up next.
Start EMS.
A shocking video captures what happens when a loaded weapon falls into the wrong hands.
This scene is unbelievable.
A woman slipped her handcuffs. It's an AR-15 assault rifle.
Start EMS. Start EMS. What the heck?
August 12th, 2022, Bridge Creek, Oklahoma. A man calls the cops about a woman who is in his yard, behaving bizarrely.
He wakes up seeing her barking like a dog in his front lawn. Something is not right here.
When police arrive, they immediately handcuff Rachel Clay and put her in the back seat of a patrol car.
The deputy is taking a report from the homeowner. They're having a simple conversation, and all of a sudden, gunfire rings out.
What was that?
Where is this coming from? It's coming from out of the blue.
Gunshots hit two people, not just the witness, but also one of the officers was grazed.
Danny, I'm hit right here. I'm hit right here too, Danny. Hit in the head.
They're not really sure what's happening next.
The homeowner, who has been shot in the chest, is bleeding but still talking to officers.
This is unbelievable. This victim is hit in the chest. He's able to walk, continue moving, goes over, finds cover.
What is going on? How is this man able to still be standing?
As 9 more shots ring out, it's mayhem, with everyone scrambling for safety.
County, we got shots fired up here. We need backup immediately. Start EMS. Start EMS. We got a civilian. Got a civilian hit. What the heck?
The cops are just confused. They're thinking, the woman's apprehended. Why is a random person now shooting at us?
What they don't realize is that inside the patrol car, Clay has managed to get her hands free.
You're placing someone in handcuffs. You can't imagine that they're able to finagle their way or figure out a way out of them.
And then she finds a compartment labeled gun, and the gun is what she grabs. She's now armed and dangerous.
Get out of her cuffs.
This is an AR-15 rifle, a very powerful weapon, and she knows how to use it.
Got a civilian hit.
Hearing the gunfire, the man's shocked son races outside.
Shots fired. Get over here. Get over here. Your dad's hit, man. He got hit. Dad, he got hit. Get out, Joey. Dad, are you okay?
As backup arrives, he is rushed to the hospital.
It just happens so quickly and so fast.
But this isn't over yet. Clay barricades herself inside the car.
She was in the cop car, taping up all the windows so no one could see what was going on.
She stays there for 3.5 hours until it all comes to a dramatic end, with news choppers capturing police breaking out the back window.
A tense standoff lasted hours.
She slipped her handcuffs and then fired off a round of shots.
The video goes viral, racking up millions of views.
The question on all of our minds is, why and how was she able to access this rifle?
It turns out that the glass partition was partially open because of the heat.
The air condition was on, and for the air to be able to reach the person in the back, the window was open.
They didn't think she was going to reach for a gun.
Luckily, the 2 people Clay hit, the homeowner and a deputy whose head was grazed by a bullet, recover from their injuries.
She had good aim. These bullets really could cause major harm or death.
Clay is charged with 3 felony counts of shooting with intent to kill.
She was supposed to be medicated because of some mental health issues, and she was off her medication, and that is what led us to this scenario.
But she is deemed competent to stand trial. And there's a surprising turn when reporters reveal an unexpected plot twist.
Rachel Clay and the man they say she shot met the night before.
They knew each other for a short time.
The man who was shot is actually the one who brought the shooter into his own home. You never really know who you're meeting and what their ulterior motives could be. Stranger danger, we teach kids about that, but it's something that adults have to worry about too.
This is still a very urgent search.
Unbelievable escapes.
Oh, no.
Jumps out the window, head first.
Dangerous criminals on the loose.
He's killed 2 people previously.
That is terrifying.
A dad's heroics saved the day.
I just grabbed him.
Don't do this.
I was beating up that guy.
And a hot date
I met a girl on Instagram.
Not a good move.
ends in disaster.
I mean, jail!
Wild viral videos you have to see to believe.
Instead of following orders to go back to jail, they head for the door.
Where is he going to go? How's he going to get out?
Not all criminals are smart.
There's nothing more intense than prisoner escapes caught on camera.
Viral escape videos are so enticing because it's like a real-life cops and robbers chase. We want to see if the guy's going to get away.
In Wisconsin,
Can I take this off or not?
a handcuffed teen suspect is left by himself.
You never leave someone in a room unless there's bars on the windows.
The 17-year-old doesn't miss this lucky opportunity. Within 10 seconds, he dips out the second-story window, falling 15 feet.
This kid jumps out the window head first with his hands cuffed. And miraculously, he seems to have made a safe landing because he gets up and he runs off.
You can see the clock on the wall where 10 minutes actually pass before the detective even comes back into the room.
Oh, no. Wait.
It takes deputies 4 hours to catch up with the runaway teen, who is still handcuffed. To prevent this from happening again, the sheriff's office has installed metal grates on the window. But the bold getaway will live in viral infamy. In Ohio, this man is booked on a felony drug charge. But he doesn't stick around for his sentencing. As deputies frantically chase after him, one hurls himself over a railing.
I admire the dedication, but I don't know what he was attempting to accomplish there, but A for effort.
The deputy is hospitalized for a minor concussion and broken ribs. The runaway suspect isn't caught until 3 days later. In Utah, there's a similar swan dive, but this time, it's the escapee who takes the fall.
This man clearly would rather go to the hospital or the graveyard than to jail.
The man is appearing in court on alleged drug charges. But he quickly ditches the courtroom and takes a desperate leap of faith.
What do people do when they fall? They brace themselves with their hands and their arms. But if you're handcuffed, you absolutely cannot do that. So what is going to brace the fall? Your head, your neck, and your back. Those are extreme injuries. I have to imagine that as soon as he was falling, he was regretting his decision.
He breaks his leg and pelvis and fractures his skull. The flying leap goes viral with 2 million views. In Washington, 2 other inmates try to make a break from the courtroom, but this judge isn't having it.
This video really shows the judge's commitment to justice.
Like a superhero, he tears off his robe and gives chase.
It's not the judge's job to do that, but he says, nope, it's my courtroom and I'm going to get him back.
After one man face plants, losing a shoe, they take off down the stairwell, with the judge chasing them. He recaps the adventure on the news.
Once I got into the stairwell, I knew I was going to be able to catch the one that was in front of me because it was the right thing to do.
This judge was definitely in great shape. He was ahead of the officers.
Both men are caught, one by the judge, the other a few blocks away by someone else.
But I hope the takeaway from these videos, specifically for the law enforcement agency, is they need to increase their security measures. Just a hunch.
And it's a lack in security that leads to a jailbreak that has the entire country talking.
For a 2-week manhunt
For an extremely dangerous man.
He is now armed with a .22 caliber rifle.
This convict climbing the walls.
He had nothing to lose.
August 31st, 2023, Westchester, Pennsylvania. At the county prison, an inmate in the exercise yard is about to take fitness to another level.
He probably did a couple test runs where he went up a couple feet just to see if he could do it.
Cameras capture his daring escape.
I've never seen someone use their body and 2 walls as leverage to go backwards.
The prisoner's name is Danilo Cavalcante, and he's considered to be highly dangerous.
This guy who escaped was in there for murder. If he can escape, I'm sure he was willing to risk it all.
Cavalcante is in prison on a first-degree murder conviction for fatally stabbing his ex-girlfriend 38 times in front of her kids. Just 9 days before this dramatic escape, he is sentenced to life without parole. He is also wanted for another murder in his home country of Brazil.
We know that this person has a disregard for human life, so what are they willing to do to anyone in that surrounding community who attempts to stop them?
And there's another concern.
The staff didn't even notice he was missing for an hour.
He climbs the wall just before 9 a.m., but officials don't sound the alarm until 10:01.
This prisoner had a head start before anyone even knew what was going on.
Nobody knows, nobody's aware. That is terrifying.
The community panics. Schools cancel classes. Residents advised to stay alert.
Authorities urging everyone to lock up their homes and vehicles.
There's a murderer running around in the community.
Police in Pennsylvania are searching for a dangerous murderer who managed to crawl his way out of prison.
3 days in, still no sign of the 34-year-old fugitive.
We have helicopters over top. We have police officers everywhere.
The manhunt tops the news.
Very urgent search for an extremely dangerous man.
When you think about the square footage that has to be covered, especially a wooded area, it is a needle in a haystack.
But then investigators get a break. A security camera catches Cavalcante at a botanical garden just 5 miles from the prison.
He was out there in the wilderness, living in the woods on nothing.
He's seen again 2 more times the following night. On day 9, 2 porch cameras spot him, clean-shaven and wearing a green hoodie.
He was somewhat of a survivalist, going from house to house, stealing whatever supplies he needed to stay on the run.
On day 11, a resident who catches him stealing a rifle fires several shots at him as he flees. Police warn the public not to underestimate how dangerous this man is.
He's killed 2 people previously. I would suspect that he's desperate enough to use that weapon.
Authorities increased the reward for his capture to $25,000. As the story goes viral, people are terrified.
Obviously, this man is very dangerous. Police are really preparing for any eventuality.
He is very determined. We are even more determined.
And then, as the nation panics about the murderer who is on the loose.
We have breaking news right now. Authorities have confirmed the capture of Danilo Cavalcante, the escaped killer in Pennsylvania.
It turns out a canine named Yoda found Cavalcante hiding in a pile of logs. He's charged with 20 offenses, including burglary, criminal trespassing, theft, and possession of a firearm, and transferred to a maximum security prison to serve his life sentence. Still, the fact that he was able to spider crawl his way out of prison in the first place leaves the community on edge.
You would just think that if someone is in prison for murder, they are keeping track of them at all times.
But as you'll see in this next viral video, sometimes it takes an unexpected hero to thwart danger.
The customer who stepped in when things went south.
A good Samaritan stepping in.
I saw evil happen in front of me.
Look, calm down. I do not want to hurt you, man.
June 16th, 2023, Chicago, Illinois. On his way home with 2 of his 6 kids, Idris Redzovic makes a quick stop at a convenience store.
To treat my kids to some Slurpees after their jiu-jitsu class.
As I was getting the drinks, these girls came in complaining about a guy causing problems in the parking lot.
Idris steps outside the store, ordering his kids to stay in the car. The man appears to be dangerous, so he dials police. That's when you see him, in the black tank top, walking into the store.
I see him like arguing with a store clerk.
And things turn violent.
He threw an overhand heavy punch and hit the store clerk in the head. Once I saw that, I just jumped.
The 19-year-old clerk in the red jacket gets caught in the middle as Idris takes the man down.
I just grabbed him and held him down. I tied him up and I put him into a pretzel.
Idris seems very comfortable keeping this man in a very uncomfortable position.
That's because this dad is an expert in martial arts.
I'm a head instructor at my own academy in Chicago. I'm a jiu-jitsu black belt. I was able to twist him up in a position called the gift wrap hold. It's a good way to control somebody without having to put any damage on them.
Watching it all from the car, Idris's kids pull out their phones to record.
Look at this! Mom was beating up that guy in the store because he's trying to beat up another person. Wait, that's the bad boy.
Other witnesses also start recording.
These people keep on recording him.
So Idris joins in and begins streaming live to Facebook.
I'm putting you on camera, so if anything
Hey, homie, let me
you come in.
homie.
I wasn't sure if the cops were gonna come in and grab me and say, I'm the bad guy, and I had to protect myself.
Come on. No, man, I'm not letting you go, man. You are harassing those girls. You're going nowhere, brother.
Then, things take a surprising turn.
What's your name?
My name's, don't worry about my name.
Where you from, bro?
I'm from Bosnia.
All right, then when you checked your medical, where'd you go?
I came here in Chicago.
Where?
In Chicago.
Where? What neighborhood?
From this neighborhood.
They're having this full-on conversation on camera.
Why isn't my life like yours?
Cause, bro, you got it easy.
How do I got it easy?
The conversation gets really deep, similar to what you would see between a therapist and a patient.
My dad passed away when I was a little kid. I had it rough too. You understand me? I didn't have a father.
All right, so let me go then.
You have a father?
Let me go. No.
Me neither. And I didn't make no excuses.
It's almost as if this attacker is trying to negotiate with Idris, similar to what you see in like a hostage negotiation.
I got sons, little.
I got kids too.
For a split second, I even thought about letting him go.
What? I'm trying to be nice to you, man.
You could let me go.
I'm not letting you go.
That turns out to be a wise move. Because when chatting fails, the man gets aggressive.
Don't do that shit to me, bro.
I don't want to
You got me a little bitch. Don't do me like that. I got my own kids.
We all got problems.
He's literally fighting him on the ground right now. No. Look, he's beating him up.
Idris suspects the man is under the influence.
You're too drunk right now. Then why are you so damn wasted? You reek of
I'm
alcohol.
not wasting my...
And he has to hold him down for 20 minutes until police show up.
I'm gonna make this real easy for you guys. Break me off. Give me off.
You're gonna break my arm. Damn. Hold on.
He swung at this guy, started attacking this guy, and that's when I jumped in and took him down to the ground.
Can't you, my girlfriend?
30-year-old Christopher Cruz is arrested and charged with misdemeanor battery and retail theft. And Idris learns that his live stream has blown up.
I kind of forgot about it. I find out later it had millions of views.
His heroics quickly hit the news.
The tables are turned on a suspected thief.
You can let me go.
I'm not letting you go.
Idris says he's just glad he was able to intervene before things got any worse.
I'm gonna jump in and help, you know, any chance I get, if I think it's the right thing to do.
You got me a little bitch.
Coming up next, shocking video of a man whose date night ends with him not going home.
What are you gonna do? Throw me in jail?
We're going to jail.
You only followed my eyes, yes, sir. Following.
He's out meeting someone from Instagram.
Things start to take a bad turn.
She's a elementary teacher, bro. I mean, jail!
January 3rd, 2022, Englewood, Florida. It's 9:30 on a Monday evening.
Let me know the unit, please.
A sheriff's deputy pulls this car over for speeding.
Hi.
Hey, how are you?
Turn the car off.
Yeah, absolutely.
When an officer engages with an operator, they're looking for potential indicators of why they're not abiding by traffic laws.
Do you know the speed limit coming off Agwood Beach?
35.
It's 35. Give me your license, your registration, your proof of insurance.
Okay. So I just moved here 4 months ago.
4 months ago? Where from?
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin?
I know, bold, right?
Cool, man.
The operator's being cooperative, very talkative, which is, by the way, another potential indicator.
So I didn't get my license registered yet.
I will take whatever you have.
So here's that.
Okay.
And,
That's a credit card. I don't need that. You have the registration?
I just moved here and I didn't have the registration yet.
Okay.
Because I just moved here a month and a half before I bought the car.
Okay.
So I didn't get my plates yet.
He's just kind of talking in circles.
I bought this entire car 2 months before I moved here.
Got it. Step out of the vehicle for me, okay?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
We don't have smell-o-vision, but if I had to guess, this officer knew pretty quickly that this was probably a DUI situation.
All right, we're coming right back here, okay? Come on, right back here. How much have you had to drink tonight?
6 drinks.
6 drinks?
6 drinks.
Okay. Over how long?
8 p.m.
8 o'clock? Okay.
It's been a while.
It's been a while? Okay.
I met a girl on Instagram, you know what I'm saying?
I hear you.
He's out drinking, having a good time, meeting someone from Instagram for a date.
The officer may be laughing.
Relax, just relax. We're just talking right now, okay?
But he is not about to let this driver go without making sure he's safe to be behind the wheel.
And the way that we do that is through standardized field sobriety tests.
Yes, sir.
And that shows
I've done 2.
You've done 2?
I've done 2.
Can you see the red tip of my finger right here?
Yes, sir, I can.
You're gonna follow with your eyes and your eyes only, okay?
Yes, sir.
It's not only the test itself, it's the individual's ability to follow directions.
Follow it with your eyes.
Right, following. Right.
Okay.
Down.
You're looking straight at me without
I did
following.
not. I followed the...
You did not.
Incorrect.
Not a good start to this test.
I'm listening, sir. Right.
We're not following with our eyes anymore, sir. We're gonna move on, okay?
1, 2, 3.
Are you done?
He bombs one test after the other.
11,001, 11,014, eh?
He's so drunk, he thinks he's doing a good job at this point. He doesn't realize that all he's really doing is digging himself a deeper hole.
And left.
Left, right here, on my nose.
Okay, we got one more to do, okay? For this
Yes,
one,
sir.
we're gonna stand just like that. We're bringing our hands behind your back.
Where do you want me to face?
There you go.
That
Put your
way?
hands together.
Yes, sir.
You're being placed under arrest for DUI.
It was actually a pretty good move. Hey, we have one more test. I need you to put your hands behind your back. Unfortunately, once he realizes that he's being put in handcuffs, the whole situation takes a turn.
What do you have in your car that needs to go through the jail?
You have a phone and a wallet?
Can I help you guys through my car?
No, we're gonna go through it for you. Do you have anything in there that we
What
didn't
do
know
you mean?
about?
Why are you gonna go through my car?
It does bring up some additional questions. Are there drugs? Are there weapons? Is there a potential victim in there that we're unaware of at this point?
Hey.
It becomes very combative, very argumentative, non-compliant.
Hey!
You're getting a little
Please,
bit.
please.
Do not do that again or I'm gonna hobble you. Do you understand me?
What do you mean hobble me?
Do not punch your head against the
What are you
cage.
gonna do? Throw me in jail?
We're going to jail.
Holy I mean damn jail! Dude! This is crazy, bro!
Stop what you're doing.
When you're kicking on the doors, fighting with police officers, that will lead to a resisting arrest charge.
Officers find nothing unusual in the driver's car.
Hey! Hey! Sir!
I got your wallet and your phone.
And as reality sets in, he forgets all about the Instagram date he bragged about and remembers his girlfriend.
My damn girlfriend, who's an elementary teacher, needs a ride home.
We'll arrange that.
No, you won't.
I think the girlfriend doesn't really care as much about getting picked up.
She needs to pick up.
More so, who were you on an Instagram date with?
She's a elementary teacher, bro.
That's something that he may have to answer for more than even this video.
Police arrest 24-year-old Daniel Jolly and he is later found guilty of driving under the influence.
This operator blew a BAC of .248, so he was well over the legal limit of .08.
Video of his drunk tantrum races across the internet with more than 2 million views.
I know that at the beginning, this is kind of a lighthearted situation where the operator's funny, having a good time. DUI is not a funny situation. You're putting yourself at risk and also the people driving around you.
Holy I mean, damn! Yeah!
When the lights came on inside South Carolina's execution chamber on September 6, 1991, the man seated in the electric chair had already become a legend. Not because anyone admired him, nor because history had settled the truth about his crimes, but because almost every fact surrounding his life seemed to exist alongside a contradiction. His name was Donald Henry Gaskins, though almost everyone knew him by a nickname that had followed him since childhood, Pee-wee. He stood barely 5 feet tall, a man whose small frame concealed decades of violence. Officially, investigators were able to attribute only a limited number of murders directly to him. Yet Gaskins himself insisted that the real number exceeded 100. Somewhere between those two figures lies one of the most disputed stories in American criminal history. Even as he approached his final moments, no one could answer the question that had haunted detectives, prosecutors, journalists, and criminologists for years. Who was Donald Henry Gaskins really? Was he a serial killer whose full list of victims would never be known? Or was he also a master manipulator who carefully crafted an image of himself as one of America's most prolific murderers? That uncertainty is what separates this case from many others. Most serial murder investigations revolve around identifying the offender, connecting evidence, and establishing responsibility. The Gaskins case goes one step further. The identity of the killer is not in dispute. His convictions are not in dispute. His execution is not in dispute. The uncertainty begins only after those facts have been established. It begins with his own words. Throughout the years, Donald Henry Gaskins repeatedly claimed that he had murdered more than 100 people. According to his own account, many of those victims were drifters, hitchhikers, migrant workers, prostitutes, and people living on the margins of society. He later referred to these crimes collectively as his coastal kills, suggesting that many victims disappeared without anyone noticing or reporting them. Yet investigators were never able to verify most of these confessions. In many cases, there were no bodies, no missing person reports that matched his descriptions, no forensic evidence, no witnesses, nothing beyond the stories told by the man himself. At the same time, not every confession proved to be false. After his arrest, Gaskins led investigators to burial sites scattered across parts of South Carolina. Some of the remains discovered their matched victims who had been missing for years. In those instances, his knowledge could not easily be dismissed. He knew where bodies had been buried. He knew details that had not been made public. He confessed to murders that investigators had been unable to solve. Those discoveries transformed him from an ordinary murderer into a serial killer whose crimes stretched far beyond what police had originally imagined. But every confirmed confession was followed by another that could not be verified. Every truthful statement seemed to exist beside another that raised doubts. Detectives found themselves trapped in an unusual position. They were investigating a suspect who sometimes told the truth and sometimes appeared to embellish. Determining which version of Donald Henry Gaskins they were listening to became almost as difficult as solving the murders themselves. Years later, while serving his prison sentence, Gaskins would collaborate with author Wilton Earl on a book titled Final Truth. The title itself suggested certainty, as though readers were finally being given the complete story. Instead, the book intensified the mystery. It presented detailed accounts of murders, personal reflections, and explanations for his violent life. For some readers, it offered rare insight into the mind of a serial killer. For others, it represented something entirely different, A calculated attempt by a convicted murderer to inflate his reputation by blending verified crimes with stories that no one could conclusively disprove. Even today, researchers continue to disagree about how much of the book should be believed. Some portions align with documented evidence. Others cannot be independently confirmed. The result is a narrative suspended somewhere between confession and self-created mythology. That uncertainty has become one of the defining characteristics of the Gaskins case. Yet reducing this story to a debate over numbers risks overlooking what truly matters. Whether Donald Henry Gaskins murdered 9 people, 15 people, or far more than that, each confirmed victim represents an individual life violently ended. Behind every police report was a family left searching for answers. Behind every grave discovered in the woods was someone who had disappeared from the lives of parents, siblings, children, or friends. The mystery surrounding the total number of victims should never overshadow those whose deaths can be established beyond doubt. True crime often struggles with that balance. The most notorious offenders sometimes become larger than the people they harmed. Their names dominate headlines while victims become brief footnotes. This story seeks to avoid that trap. Donald Henry Gaskins was responsible for horrific acts of violence. Nothing about his difficult childhood, his years in juvenile detention, or his later claims changes that reality. His background may help explain the path that led him toward crime, but it does not excuse it. Understanding how a violent offender develops is different from justifying the choices that followed. The distinction is essential. In many respects, Gaskins seemed determined to control the narrative surrounding his own life. He spoke openly about his crimes. He categorized his victims. He described methods, motives, and philosophies. He presented himself as someone who had embraced violence long before his arrest. Yet, because so many of these descriptions originated with Gaskins himself, investigators were forced to ask whether they were hearing genuine confessions or carefully constructed performances. That question remains unanswered decades after his execution. Ironically, the final murder directly attributed to Donald Henry Gaskins did not occur in a forest, along a highway, or inside an abandoned rural property. It occurred inside prison walls. While already incarcerated, Gaskins became involved in the killing of another inmate, Rudolph Tyner. According to the established record, he constructed an improvised explosive device disguised as prison communication equipment. When Tyner connected it to an electrical outlet, the device exploded, killing him instantly. That murder ultimately resulted in the death sentence that brought Gaskins to the execution chamber. In 1991, even while imprisoned, he remained capable of orchestrating lethal violence. On the night before his scheduled execution, Gaskins reportedly attempted to take his own life using a blade he had hidden. Prison officials intervened, and he was kept alive so that the sentence imposed by the court could be carried out the following day. When the time finally came, he offered only a brief remark, stating that his attorney would speak on his behalf and that he was ready. There was no lengthy confession, no dramatic revelation, no definitive answer to the question that had followed him for years. The electric chair ended Donald Henry Gaskins' life, but it did not end the debate surrounding it. More than 3 decades later, his case continues to occupy a peculiar place in American criminal history. Some regard him as one of the country's most prolific serial killers. Others argue that his reputation rests partly upon exaggeration, manipulation, and carefully cultivated notoriety. The available evidence supports neither extreme with complete certainty. What remains instead is a complicated record containing confirmed murders, disputed confessions, recovered remains, missing evidence, and unanswered questions that may never be resolved. Before examining the crimes themselves, before discussing the investigations that uncovered hidden graves, before exploring the courtroom proceedings that ultimately condemned him, it is necessary to travel back to the beginning, long before he became known as a serial killer. Donald Henry Gaskins was a neglected child growing up in rural South Carolina. The story that follows begins not with murder, but with poverty, abandonment, violence, and a childhood that would shape the man the world would eventually know as Pee Wee Gaskins. Long before Donald Henry Gaskins became one of the most controversial serial killers in American history, he was simply a child growing up in rural South Carolina during the Great Depression. Florence County in the 1930s was a place where poverty was common, opportunities were limited, and many families struggled simply to survive. For countless children born into those difficult circumstances, life was marked by hardship, but not by violence against others. Donald Gaskins, however, would later describe a childhood that was not only poor but also deeply unstable. While his own accounts must always be approached with caution, several aspects of his early life are well documented and reveal a pattern of neglect, isolation, and exposure to violence that shaped his development from an unusually young age. One of the first mysteries surrounding Donald Gaskins existed before he was even old enough to remember. He never truly knew who his biological father was. His mother had children outside of marriage, and according to later accounts, Donald grew up without a stable father figure or a consistent family structure. Instead of security, his childhood was defined by uncertainty. Instead of affection, he experienced emotional distance. Years later, Gaskins claimed that he did not even know his own first name was Donald until a juvenile court judge addressed him by it. Whether remembered perfectly or not, the story reflects the image he consistently presented of a boy who believed he had been largely ignored from the very beginning of his life. Another event that became central to Gaskins' own explanation of his violent personality occurred when he was still an infant. At approximately 1 year old, he accidentally drank kerosene, an incident that reportedly caused seizures and neurological complications for several years afterward. Throughout adulthood, Gaskins often pointed to this accident as the moment that permanently altered his mind, suggesting that the poisoning affected his emotional control and contributed to the person he eventually became. However, investigators and researchers have consistently noted that there is no scientific evidence confirming such a direct connection. Many people experience childhood injuries without becoming violent criminals, and there is no medical conclusion proving that the kerosene incident caused the murders committed decades later. Even so, the accident became an important part of Gaskins' own narrative, one he repeatedly used when discussing his past. If there was one aspect of his childhood that everyone around him noticed immediately, it was his size. Donald Gaskins never grew very tall, standing only about 5 feet 1 inch as an adult. As a boy, he was significantly smaller than many of his classmates, and that physical difference quickly became a source of ridicule. The nickname Pee Wee followed him almost everywhere he went. For many children, teasing eventually fades into distant memory. For Gaskins, according to his later descriptions, the nickname became a constant reminder that others viewed him as weak. Whether every incident occurred exactly as he described can never be known, but it is clear that he believed he spent much of his childhood being humiliated because of his appearance. The resentment that developed during those years would remain with him long into adulthood. Rather than responding by withdrawing from conflict, Gaskins increasingly moved toward it. School held little interest for him. Instead of focusing on education, he began spending more time with other troubled boys whose lives revolved around petty crime. Before reaching his teenage years, he had already become involved in theft, fighting, and acts of vandalism. Eventually, he formed a small juvenile gang that later became known as the Trouble Trio. Despite the almost harmless sound of the name, the group's activities were anything but harmless. According to the available information, the boys committed burglaries, stole property, assaulted people, robbed victims, and participated in acts of sexual violence. Their crimes escalated rapidly, demonstrating that Donald Gaskins had become familiar with violence long before reaching adulthood. The pattern emerging during these years would continue throughout the rest of his life. Rather than learning from punishment, he appeared to become increasingly comfortable crossing legal and moral boundaries. Eventually, the authorities intervened. Following a serious assault, Gaskins was sent to a juvenile correctional institution. For many young offenders, reform schools were intended to provide discipline and rehabilitation. In practice, many facilities of that era were violent environments where abuse was common and vulnerable children received little protection. According to Gaskins' later testimony, his small stature made him an immediate target inside the institution. He claimed that older inmates repeatedly beat him and sexually assaulted him. Although every detail cannot be independently verified, multiple accounts agree that he endured severe abuse while confined there. These experiences became another recurring theme whenever Gaskins later attempted to explain his criminal evolution. He frequently described this period as the moment he decided that weakness invited victimization and that survival required becoming more violent than everyone else. Again, explanation should never be confused with justification. Countless survivors of abuse never become violent offenders themselves. Nevertheless, understanding the environment in which Gaskins developed remains important because it helps explain the progression of his criminal behavior without excusing it. According to his own recollections, something fundamental changed during those years of confinement. He no longer viewed violence merely as a means of defending himself. Instead, he began seeing it as a way to gain control. In an environment where physical dominance determined status, he concluded that power belonged to those willing to inflict fear before fear could be inflicted upon them. That philosophy, whether consciously developed or gradually adopted, would become visible throughout his later crimes. After leaving juvenile custody, Donald Gaskins did not return to an ordinary adolescence. Instead, he entered adulthood already deeply familiar with correctional institutions, criminal behavior, and physical violence. Rather than serving as a turning point away from crime, his time in detention appeared to reinforce the habits he had already begun developing. The transition from juvenile offender to adult criminal occurred with alarming speed. Over the following years, he repeatedly engaged in theft, assault, rape, automobile theft, and prison escapes. Arrests became a recurring feature of his life. Prison sentences alternated with periods of freedom, but each release seemed to bring another series of crimes rather than an attempt at rebuilding a lawful existence. Looking back, investigators would later observe that Donald Gaskins never experienced the kind of stable adulthood that might have interrupted this pattern. Instead, criminal behavior became almost routine. Violence, incarceration, release, and reoffending formed a cycle that repeated itself for years. During one period of imprisonment, Gaskins later claimed that he killed another inmate named Hazel Brazel, describing the act as self-defense. Whatever the exact circumstances, the incident further demonstrated how violence continued to surround him even while incarcerated. It also reinforced a disturbing pattern that investigators would later recognize. Whether inside prison walls or outside them, conflict involving Donald Gaskins increasingly ended with serious injury or death. Despite this long criminal history, there came a period when Gaskins appeared, at least on the surface, to settle into a more conventional life. After his release, he opened an automobile repair business and outwardly presented himself as a working man. To neighbors and casual acquaintances, there may have been little reason to suspect that the small mechanic they occasionally encountered would eventually become associated with one of South Carolina's most notorious murder investigations. The contrast between appearance and reality would become one of the defining features of his later life. Behind the image of ordinary employment, according to both investigators and Gaskins' own admissions, something far darker was developing. He would later claim that by the late 1960s his motivations had changed. Crimes committed for money or revenge gradually gave way to killings driven by something more personal. He described murder as becoming connected to feelings of control and power. Such statements must be viewed carefully because they originate from Gaskins himself, a man whose credibility was repeatedly questioned. Even so, they provide insight into how he wished his crimes to be understood. Whether completely truthful or partially self-serving, his description suggests that violence had become more than a practical tool. It had become part of his identity. As the years passed, the neglected child who had once been mocked for his size transformed into an adult who increasingly sought dominance through intimidation and brutality. The boy who claimed to have spent his childhood feeling powerless would eventually become a man, accused of exercising absolute power over the lives of others. Before long, the crimes that had once consisted primarily of theft, assault, and repeated arrests would evolve into something far more horrifying. The murders that followed would leave families searching for missing loved ones, investigators uncovering graves in isolated woods, and an entire state confronting the possibility that one man had been killing for years without anyone realizing the full extent of his violence. The next chapter of Donald Henry Gaskin's life would no longer be defined simply by criminality. It would be defined by death. By the time Donald Henry Gaskins entered adulthood, crime was no longer an occasional act of desperation or rebellion. It had become the defining pattern of his life. The instability that marked his childhood did not disappear when he left juvenile detention. Instead, it evolved into an endless cycle of arrests, imprisonment, release, and reoffending. While many offenders eventually reach a point where they attempt to distance themselves from their past, the available record suggests that Gaskins moved steadily in the opposite direction. His criminal behavior became broader, more serious, and increasingly violent. Looking back through the timeline of his life, investigators saw no single moment that transformed him overnight into a murderer. Rather, they observed a gradual escalation in which each offense appeared to lower the barrier to committing the next. After leaving juvenile custody, Gaskins accumulated a lengthy history of criminal activity. He was involved in automobile theft, assaults, rape, and repeated escapes from custody. Prison became a familiar environment rather than an extraordinary punishment. Each sentence removed him from society temporarily, yet none appeared to interrupt the progression of his behavior. Instead, incarceration often exposed him to even more violence. According to later accounts, Gaskins claimed that while imprisoned he killed another inmate named Hazel Brazel, describing the incident as an act of self-defense. Whether viewed through the legal record or through Gaskins' own version of events, the incident demonstrated how lethal violence had become intertwined with his daily existence. Death was no longer something that happened around him. It was something in which he actively participated. Despite his repeated encounters with the criminal justice system, there eventually came a period during which Donald Gaskins appeared to settle into a more ordinary routine. After being released from prison, he established an automobile repair business. To those who encountered him casually, he may have seemed like a man attempting to build a legitimate life. A small repair shop offered the appearance of stability, employment, and reintegration into society. Nothing about that outward image hinted at what investigators would later uncover. The contrast between appearance and reality would become one of the defining themes of the Gaskins case. Outwardly, he could appear unremarkable. Inwardly, according to his later admissions, his thinking had already begun to change in dangerous ways. Gaskins would eventually describe the late 1960s as the period during which murder itself took on a different meaning for him. Earlier crimes had often involved practical motives such as theft, retaliation, or eliminating witnesses. But according to his own statements, killing gradually became associated with something far more personal. He claimed that it gave him a sense of power and control. These statements require careful consideration because they originated from Gaskins himself, a man whose credibility was repeatedly questioned by investigators. Nevertheless, they reveal how he chose to portray his own psychological evolution, whether entirely truthful or partially shaped to enhance his reputation. His description suggests that violence had become more than a criminal act. It had become central to the identity he wished to project. As investigators later examined his confessions, they noticed another unusual feature of the case. Unlike many serial killers whose crimes follow a relatively consistent pattern, Donald Gaskins did not rely upon a single method of murder. According to the available information, he used a wide range of techniques. Some victims were reportedly shot, others were stabbed, some were beaten with blunt objects, others were strangled. He also claimed to have drowned victims and even buried some alive. This absence of a consistent method complicated efforts to identify connections between crimes. There was no single forensic signature that immediately linked one killing to another. Instead, the common factor appeared to be the offender himself rather than the specific manner in which the crimes were committed. The methods used after the killings also varied, though many shared one characteristic: concealment. According to both the investigative record and Gaskins' own confessions, bodies were frequently hidden in isolated rural locations. Forests, swamps, and remote properties became burial sites chosen because they reduced the likelihood of discovery. Some victims remained missing for years before investigators eventually recovered their remains. Others have never been located at all. These hidden graves would later become one of the most significant forms of evidence against him, particularly when Gaskins personally guided investigators to burial sites that had remained unknown. Yet even here, uncertainty persisted. Some locations contained human remains exactly where he said they would be. Others revealed nothing, leaving detectives unsure whether they were dealing with forgotten details, deliberate deception, or crimes that had never occurred. As Gaskins spoke more openly about his alleged murders, he developed his own system for categorizing them. This classification appeared most clearly in his later autobiography, Final Truth, where he divided his victims into two broad groups. The first category became known as the coastal kills. According to Gaskins, these victims were people who lived on the margins of society. He described them as hitchhikers, drifters, migrant workers, and prostitutes encountered along the coastal regions of South Carolina. In his own telling, these individuals were selected because they were unlikely to be missed immediately. He claimed that many lived transient lifestyles, traveled alone, or lacked close family connections capable of reporting their disappearance quickly. It was a disturbing explanation, one that reflected a calculated view of vulnerability. Yet it is also the portion of Gaskins' story that investigators viewed with the greatest skepticism. Although he claimed that dozens of these murders occurred, most were never independently verified. No bodies, forensic evidence, or missing persons records conclusively supported the extraordinary number of victims he described. As a result, historians and criminologists continue to debate how many, if any, of the alleged coastal kills actually took place. The second category contained what Gaskins referred to as the serious murders. Unlike the anonymous victims he claimed to have encountered while traveling, these were individuals he personally knew. Friends, acquaintances, relatives, business associates, accomplices, people who hired him, or people who had become problems in his life appeared in this group. Significantly, these are the cases that correspond more closely with documented investigations. The victims had identifiable names, families who reported them missing, and circumstances that could be examined through physical evidence. While not every detail of Gaskins' confessions could be confirmed, investigators generally regarded this category as more credible than his sweeping claims regarding the coastal kills. This distinction between documented crimes and unverified confessions became one of the defining challenges of the investigation. Detectives were forced to evaluate every statement individually rather than accepting or rejecting his testimony as a whole. One confession might lead directly to recovered remains. The next might point toward an empty field. Each success increased the possibility that other confessions were also true. Each failure raised new doubts about his honesty. Gaskins seemed capable of mixing verifiable facts with claims that could neither be proved nor disproved. This made him an exceptionally difficult subject for investigators, prosecutors, and later researchers attempting to reconstruct his criminal history. It also shaped his public image. Rather than becoming known solely for the murders that could be established in court, he became equally infamous for the murders that existed only in his own words. Some observers believed he had deliberately exaggerated the number of victims to ensure lasting notoriety. Others argued that at least some of his unverified confessions may have been genuine crimes whose evidence had simply disappeared over time. The truth remains uncertain because so much depended upon information that only Gaskins himself claimed to possess. Yet regardless of the disputed numbers, one fact became increasingly difficult to ignore. People connected to Donald Gaskins were disappearing. Unlike the anonymous figures described in the alleged coastal kills, these victims had names, relationships, and histories that investigators could examine. Their disappearances generated questions that would eventually lead law enforcement much closer to the man responsible. Among them were young women, friends, associates, and individuals whose lives intersected with Gaskins in different ways. Some would later be found buried in remote locations. Others would become central figures in the prosecution that ultimately secured his convictions. At this stage of the story, Donald Henry Gaskins had not yet become the nationally recognized serial killer he would later be known as. To many people, he was still an obscure repeat offender living in South Carolina. But beneath that relatively ordinary appearance, investigators would later uncover a pattern of violence that stretched across years. The transition from career criminal to serial killer was no longer a matter of speculation. It had already happened. The only question was how many lives had been lost before anyone realized the full extent of what was taking place. In the years that followed, the names of several victims would emerge from the darkness, each revealing another piece of the truth. Their stories, supported by evidence rather than legend, would begin to separate documented fact from the mythology Donald Henry Gaskins spent years constructing around himself. One of the greatest challenges in understanding the crimes of Donald Henry Gaskins is separating what can be documented from what exists only in his own confessions. Over the years, Gaskins claimed responsibility for more than 100 murders, a number that would place him among the most prolific serial killers in American history. Yet investigators were never able to verify anything close to that figure. Some confessions led detectives to physical evidence and previously undiscovered burial sites. Others produced nothing at all. As a result, every claim had to be examined individually rather than accepted at face value. It is within this smaller group of documented or partially corroborated cases that the true human cost of Gaskins' crimes becomes most visible. Behind every confirmed victim was a life interrupted, a family left searching for answers, and an investigation that gradually revealed the extraordinary violence hidden beneath the appearance of an ordinary mechanic living in rural South Carolina. Among the earliest victims associated with Gaskins were two teenage girls, Janice Kirby and Patricia Allsbrook. Their case marked an important turning point because it demonstrated that Gaskins' violence extended far beyond spontaneous assaults or crimes committed for immediate gain. According to the available information, Janice Kirby was only 15 years old. She was also related to Gaskins, making the crime even more disturbing. Patricia Allsbrook, 17 years old, was Janice's friend. The two girls disappeared together, and for a period their fate remained unknown. Years later, Gaskins confessed to killing them. According to his account, the teenagers had run away from home and become involved with drugs. He claimed that he drove them into a remote area before killing them with a blunt object, reportedly a hammer or another heavy instrument. Investigators have always approached this explanation cautiously because it originated with Gaskins himself. While his confession contributed to understanding what happened, the precise motive behind the murders has never been firmly established. Some investigators suspected that sexual violence may have played a role, but the available evidence has never conclusively confirmed that theory. Rather than presenting speculation as fact, the case remains one in which the victims' deaths are documented while certain aspects of the motive remain unresolved. What is known is that two teenage girls lost their lives, and their families were forced to endure uncertainty until Gaskins' admissions helped reveal what had happened. Their deaths also illustrated another recurring feature of his crimes. The victims were often people who trusted him, or at least had reason not to fear him. There was no dramatic chase, no public confrontation, no obvious warning visible to outsiders. Instead, violence emerged only after the victims had already been placed in an isolated environment where escape became nearly impossible. The remoteness of the locations chosen by Gaskins repeatedly complicated investigations. Forests and secluded rural properties offered natural concealment, allowing victims to remain undiscovered for years. Following the murders of Janice Kirby and Patricia Allsbrook, another name entered the growing list of victims associated with Donald Gaskins, Martha and Dix. Compared with some of the other cases, the circumstances surrounding Martha's death are far less clear. According to Gaskins' own statements, she was a young woman in her 20s whom he murdered by poisoning. Yet unlike several other confessions, his explanations for killing Martha changed over time. On one occasion, he suggested that she knew too much about his criminal activities. At another point, he implied that rumors connected him to her pregnancy. Elsewhere, he referred to alleged involvement with drugs. These shifting explanations became a significant reason why investigators questioned the reliability of portions of his testimony. When a suspect repeatedly alters the motive behind a crime, confidence in the confession naturally decreases. Detectives recognized that Gaskins sometimes mixed verifiable details with stories that changed from one interview to another. Consequently, while Martha and Dix is associated with Gaskins' admissions, aspects of her case continue to illustrate the broader problem investigators faced throughout the entire investigation. The issue was rarely whether Gaskins had committed acts of violence. The issue was determining where documented truth ended and self-created narrative began. The most emotionally devastating case connected to Gaskins involved Doreen Dempsey and her 2-year-old daughter. Few crimes attributed to him generated as much outrage because the victims included not only a pregnant woman but also a very young child. According to the available record, Doreen was preparing to leave South Carolina. She was pregnant and planning to begin a different chapter of her life. Gaskins offered to drive her to a bus station, presenting what appeared to be a simple act of assistance. Instead of taking her to the destination she expected, he drove toward an isolated wooded area. There, according to the investigation and his subsequent admissions, Doreen was murdered. Her young daughter, only 2 years old, was also killed. Their bodies were buried together in a shallow grave hidden from public view. The details of this crime remain especially painful because they demonstrate the complete vulnerability of the victims. A pregnant woman attempting to travel and a toddler entirely dependent upon the adults around her had no realistic means of protecting themselves once they were isolated. Their deaths stand among the clearest reminders that serial murder affects not only statistics or criminal records but ordinary families whose futures disappear in moments of unimaginable violence. The recovery of their remains also reinforced the importance of physical evidence within the investigation. Unlike unverified confessions that pointed toward empty locations, this case involved discoveries that supported critical portions of Gaskins' admissions. Even then, investigators remained careful not to assume that every statement he made deserved equal confidence. Each confession required independent examination wherever possible. As more victims became linked to Donald Gaskins, another pattern slowly emerged. Not all of the people he killed were strangers. Many had some form of personal connection to him. Friends, relatives, acquaintances, and individuals involved in criminal activity increasingly appeared among the documented cases. This differed significantly from the anonymous victims described in his alleged coastal kills. In those stories, Gaskins portrayed himself as selecting transient individuals whose disappearances would attract little attention. In the documented cases, however, the victims often had identifiable relationships with him. Those personal connections ultimately made investigation easier because families reported disappearances, acquaintances noticed suspicious circumstances, and detectives had clearer starting points for reconstructing events. Another example involved Dennis Bellamy, a man described as having once been a friend of Gaskin's. According to the available information, the relationship eventually deteriorated because of disagreements involving money. Gaskins later admitted that he lured Bellamy into a wooded area before shooting him and burying the body. Unlike several of the broader claims involving anonymous victims, this case involved an identifiable individual whose disappearance could be investigated through conventional police work. Bellamy's death also demonstrated how Gaskins appeared willing to eliminate people once they became inconvenient or threatening to his interests. Financial disputes, personal conflicts, and the possibility that someone possessed damaging information all emerged as recurring themes within the documented murders. There was no single victim profile that fully explained his behavior. Instead, opportunity, familiarity, and perceived advantage often seemed more important than any consistent pattern regarding age, gender, or occupation. This absence of a rigid victim profile further complicated investigative efforts because there was no obvious category of individuals being targeted. Looking collectively at these documented cases reveals another significant characteristic of Donald Gaskin's criminal behavior. His methods varied considerably. Some victims were reportedly beaten with blunt instruments. Others were shot. One was allegedly poisoned. The locations also differed, though isolated rural settings remained a recurring feature. Bodies were frequently buried rather than abandoned in places where discovery would be immediate. Concealment appeared to be as important to Gaskins as the killings themselves. By hiding victims in forests, remote properties, or shallow graves, he extended the suffering of families who continued searching long after hope had begun to fade. Every missing person investigation carried the possibility that the individual might still be alive somewhere. Hidden burial sites delayed the moment when those painful uncertainties could finally be resolved. For investigators, these confirmed and partially corroborated cases accomplished something equally important. They established that Donald Henry Gaskins was not merely confessing to imaginary crimes in search of attention. At least some of his admissions corresponded with evidence that only the perpetrator was likely to know. Burial sites existed where he said they existed. Victims were recovered where he indicated they would be found. These discoveries transformed the investigation. Detectives could no longer dismiss his confessions outright. At the same time, they could not simply accept every extraordinary claim he made. Instead, they faced the difficult task of distinguishing authentic admissions from exaggeration. That challenge would define the next stage of the investigation. As detectives continued questioning Gaskins, he began providing information about additional victims and hidden graves scattered across South Carolina. Some locations would confirm their worst fears. Others would deepen the mystery surrounding a man who seemed determined to blur the line between fact and fiction. The search for the truth was only beginning, and it would soon lead investigators into isolated forests where the earth itself would begin revealing secrets that had remained buried for years. By the mid-1970s, Donald Henry Gaskins had spent years moving between periods of apparent normalcy and repeated criminal activity. To those who knew only fragments of his life, he remained a mechanic with a long criminal record. A man who had already served time in prison and whose reputation suggested violence rather than reliability. What few people realized was that his willingness to commit serious crimes had expanded beyond personal conflicts and opportunistic killings. According to the documented record, Gaskins was now prepared to kill for money. This shift added another disturbing dimension to an already complex case. He was no longer acting solely because of anger, revenge, or his own claimed desire for power. He had become a man who could treat murder as a service, accepting payment to end another person's life. It was this decision, more than any other, that ultimately accelerated the investigation leading to his arrest. Ironically, The crimes that exposed Donald Henry Gaskins were not hidden among disputed confessions or anonymous victims whose disappearances could not be easily traced. They emerged from a conspiracy involving identifiable individuals, financial arrangements, and a chain of decisions that gradually unraveled the secrecy surrounding him. At the center of this chapter stood a man named John Henry Knight. Unlike many of the alleged victims described in Gaskins' own stories, Knight was not portrayed as a random traveler or an unknown drifter. His death originated from a personal dispute that someone else wanted resolved through violence. According to the available information, a woman named Suzanne Kipper sought the murder of her former boyfriend, John Henry Knight. Rather than turning to lawful solutions, she arranged for Donald Gaskins to carry out the killing. The agreed payment was approximately $1,500. The amount itself was not extraordinary, yet it represented something profoundly disturbing. A human life had been assigned a price. For Gaskins, the agreement demonstrated how completely detached he had become from ordinary moral boundaries. Killing was no longer merely an act committed during another crime or the outcome of personal rage. It had become a transaction. Someone offered money, and he accepted the task. The circumstances surrounding Knight's murder illustrated a pattern that investigators would later recognize repeatedly throughout Gaskins' criminal history. Individuals who trusted him, associated with him, or believed they could rely upon his willingness to solve problems through violence often failed to recognize that they themselves could eventually become victims. Criminal partnerships built upon secrecy rarely remain stable for long. Once several people possess knowledge of a serious crime, every participant becomes a potential threat to every other participant. That reality soon transformed a single contract killing into a series of additional murders. Following the death of John Henry Knight, two other individuals possessed information capable of placing Donald Gaskins in extraordinary legal jeopardy. Walter Neely and Diane Neely knew enough about the killing to become dangerous witnesses. Rather than remaining silent, they allegedly attempted to blackmail Gaskins. From their perspective, they possessed leverage. They understood what had happened and believed that fear of exposure would force Gaskins to comply with their demands. Such calculations underestimated the kind of man they were confronting. For Donald Gaskins, eliminating witnesses represented a simpler solution than surrendering control or continuing to pay money. According to the documented account, he lured Walter Neely and Diane Neely to a remote location under circumstances that did not initially raise suspicion. Once they were isolated, he murdered them and concealed their bodies. The decision reflected a pattern already visible in earlier crimes. Whenever Gaskins believed someone had become a liability, violence frequently became his preferred method of removing the problem permanently. Rather than allowing witnesses to exist, he attempted to erase them altogether. Yet this strategy contained an inherent weakness. Every additional murder increased the number of missing people connected, directly or indirectly, to his life. Each disappearance generated new questions. Each victim left behind relatives, friends, acquaintances, and investigators searching for explanations. The effort to silence witnesses ultimately created even more evidence demanding investigation. What had begun as a murder-for-hire arrangement gradually expanded into a chain of killings whose connections became increasingly difficult to conceal. One important aspect of these murders distinguishes them from many of the disputed confessions discussed earlier. The victims were identifiable individuals with known relationships, documented histories, and circumstances that investigators could reconstruct. Unlike the alleged coastal kills, which often depended entirely upon Gaskins' own testimony, these cases left behind tangible investigative leads. Police could interview family members, establish timelines, examine relationships, and compare statements made by different individuals involved in the events surrounding John Henry Knight's death. This difference proved crucial. Instead of relying solely upon confessions, detectives now possessed opportunities to build a case through conventional investigative methods. As investigators continued examining these interconnected crimes, Donald Gaskins himself gradually became the central figure linking them together. His relationships with multiple victims, combined with the circumstances surrounding their disappearances, attracted increasing attention from law enforcement. The pattern emerging before detectives suggested something far larger than isolated incidents. Rather than confronting a series of unrelated homicides, investigators began considering the possibility that one offender stood behind numerous violent crimes committed over several years. This realization marked a significant turning point. Until then, many individual disappearances had been treated independently. Now they began forming part of a much broader picture. The murders connected to John Henry Knight and the Neelis also demonstrated another recurring feature of Gaskins' criminal decision-making. Financial motives frequently overlapped with self-preservation. Accepting payment to kill Knight represented greed. Killing those who attempted blackmail represented an effort to eliminate legal risk. In both situations, Gaskins appeared willing to treat human lives as obstacles or opportunities rather than as people possessing inherent value. Such reasoning reflected an extraordinary absence of empathy, one repeatedly observed throughout the documented record of his crimes. Yet even at this stage, investigators still did not understand the full extent of what they were confronting. They knew they were dealing with a dangerous offender connected to multiple murders. They did not yet realize that further questioning would produce confessions extending far beyond the crimes already under investigation. Nor did they anticipate that those confessions would eventually lead detectives into isolated forests where hidden graves waited beneath layers of soil undisturbed for years. As pressure mounted, Donald Gaskins faced a choice familiar to many offenders confronted by overwhelming evidence. He could deny involvement and challenge investigators to prove every allegation individually, or he could begin cooperating. What happened next surprised many of the detectives involved in the case. Rather than maintaining complete silence, Gaskins began talking. At first, investigators approached his statements cautiously. Experienced detectives understood that confessions could serve many purposes beyond admitting guilt. Some offenders confessed to seek attention. Others attempted to manipulate investigations, protect accomplices, or exaggerate their importance. Given Gaskins' history and personality, there was every reason to proceed carefully. Nevertheless, something unusual soon became apparent. He was not merely offering broad claims about crimes. He was providing specific locations. He described remote areas across South Carolina where bodies had allegedly been buried. He claimed that hidden graves remained untouched because no one else knew where to look. Such statements presented investigators with a dilemma. If he was telling the truth, undiscovered victims might finally be recovered, allowing families to learn what had happened to missing loved ones. If he was lying, extensive searches would waste valuable resources while granting him exactly the attention he seemed to enjoy. Detectives therefore adopted a measured approach. Instead of accepting every confession uncritically, they decided to test his credibility in the only meaningful way available. They would follow where he led them. The decision marked the beginning of one of the most remarkable phases of the entire investigation. Donald Henry Gaskins, the man who had already admitted involvement in multiple killings, now began guiding law enforcement toward locations that only the perpetrator, or someone with direct knowledge of the crimes, could reasonably identify. Some of those journeys would end with shocking discoveries buried beneath the South Carolina landscape. Others would end in disappointment and renewed uncertainty. Each excavation would force investigators to confront the same unsettling question again and again. When Donald Henry Gaskins spoke, were they listening to a murderer finally revealing the truth, or to a manipulator carefully constructing his own legend? The answer would become the defining mystery of the case, one that continued long after the arrests, the trials, and even the execution itself. By the time investigators intensified their focus on Donald Henry Gaskins, they already believed they were dealing with a dangerous and experienced criminal. The murders connected to John Henry Knight, Walter Neely, and Diane Neely had established a pattern that could no longer be dismissed as isolated violence. Yet even then, law enforcement had little understanding of how extensive Gaskin's criminal history might be. They suspected multiple homicides, but they did not anticipate that the man sitting before them would begin describing crimes stretching back years. Nor did they expect that some of those admissions would lead them directly to hidden graves. The investigation that followed became one of the most unusual in South Carolina's criminal history because it depended not only upon forensic evidence and witness testimony, but also upon the words of a man whose honesty could never be taken for granted. After his arrest in 1975, Donald Gaskins made a decision that fundamentally altered the direction of the investigation. Rather than refusing to cooperate completely, he began speaking with investigators. Experienced detectives approached this development with understandable caution. They had encountered offenders who lied to delay proceedings, sought publicity, or attempted to manipulate police by mixing truth with fabrication. Gaskins appeared capable of all those things. Every statement he made, therefore, required independent verification whenever possible. Investigators quickly realized that they could not simply accept his confessions because he claimed responsibility. They would have to test every significant detail against physical evidence. At first, the information Gaskins provided sounded extraordinary. He claimed to know the locations of numerous burial sites scattered across remote parts of South Carolina. Some, he said, contained victims already under investigation. Others allegedly held people whose disappearances had never been connected to him. If his statements proved accurate, investigators stood on the edge of uncovering crimes that had remained hidden for years. If he was lying, countless hours would be wasted searching forests, fields, and isolated properties for graves that did not exist. Rather than dismissing his claims outright or embracing them unquestioningly, detectives chose a practical approach. They followed him to the places he identified. Those searches became some of the most significant moments in the entire case. Guided by Gaskins, investigators traveled into wooded areas and remote rural locations where ordinary visitors would have had little reason to venture. These were not public parks or easily accessible landmarks. They were secluded places selected precisely because discovery was unlikely. According to the available record, some of the locations identified by Gaskins contained exactly what he claimed they would. Human remains were recovered from burial sites matching his descriptions. Those discoveries transformed the investigation almost immediately. Detectives understood that knowledge of hidden graves represented powerful evidence. Unless someone had participated in the crimes or possessed direct information from the perpetrator, accurately identifying previously unknown burial sites would be extraordinarily difficult. Every successful recovery therefore increased Gaskin's credibility regarding at least part of his testimony. Families who had spent years searching for missing relatives finally received answers, even though those answers brought devastating confirmation rather than hope. Yet the investigation never became straightforward. Just as detectives began confirming portions of Gaskin's confessions, other claims produced entirely different results. Some locations he identified revealed nothing. Search teams excavated areas where Gaskins insisted bodies had been buried, only to find empty ground. These failures forced investigators to confront an uncomfortable possibility. Either Gaskins was mistaken about certain locations, memories had become unreliable after many years, or he was deliberately inventing murders that had never occurred. The uncertainty complicated every stage of the investigation. Detectives could no longer categorize him simply as truthful or deceptive. Instead, they faced an offender whose statements existed somewhere between those two extremes. One confession might solve a long unsolved disappearance. The next might lead nowhere at all. This inconsistency became one of the defining features of the Gaskins investigation. It also explains why historians and criminologists continue debating the true number of his victims. Decades after his execution, investigators were forced to evaluate each confession individually, because no single rule applied to everything he said. The search for evidence extended beyond burial sites. Detectives compared Gaskin's statements with missing persons reports, timelines, witness accounts, and known movements of potential victims. Whenever possible, they sought independent confirmation before accepting any portion of his testimony. This careful methodology proved essential because Gaskins frequently presented himself as a man who possessed intimate knowledge of crimes extending far beyond those already known to police. His extraordinary claims demanded extraordinary scrutiny. The investigation, therefore, became a continuous process of separating confirmed fact from unsupported assertion. Every recovered body strengthened part of his story while simultaneously raising new questions about the parts that remained unverified. One of the most difficult aspects of the investigation involved the category of crimes Gaskins later referred to as the coastal kills. According to his own account, these victims included hitchhikers, migrant workers, drifters, prostitutes, and other individuals living transient lifestyles along South Carolina's coastal region. Gaskins claimed that such victims were chosen because their disappearances attracted little attention. He argued that many had no close relatives searching for them or lived lives that made them less likely to generate immediate missing person investigations. From an investigative perspective, these claims presented an enormous challenge. Because the alleged victims often lacked clear identities, verifying the murders became extremely difficult. There were few names to investigate, few families to interview, and often no physical evidence linking specific disappearances to Gaskins. Consequently, although investigators acknowledged that some unidentified victims could theoretically exist, they were unable to confirm the overwhelming majority of these alleged killings. This uncertainty remains one of the principal reasons why the figure of more than 100 victims has never been accepted by official investigations. In contrast stood the category Gaskins called the serious murders. These victims were individuals he personally knew. Friends, relatives, accomplices, business associates, employees, and people with whom he had financial or personal conflicts appeared within this group. Because these victims had identifiable names and documented relationships, investigators found it easier to reconstruct events surrounding their disappearances. Missing person reports, witness interviews, and recovered remains provided opportunities to compare Gaskins' confessions with independently established facts. Although not every detail could be verified, this category generally aligned much more closely with the available evidence than his broader claims regarding anonymous victims. As detectives continued their work, another development influenced public understanding of the case. While imprisoned, Donald Gaskins collaborated with writer Wilton Earl to produce an autobiography titled Final Truth. The book described his childhood, criminal career, methods of killing, disposal of bodies, and personal reflections regarding violence. It also formalized his distinction between the coastal kills and the serious murders, presenting readers with an organized version of his own narrative. For many members of the public, Final Truth became the primary source through which they encountered the Gaskins case. Yet investigators and researchers approached the book with considerably greater caution. On one hand, portions of the autobiography contained information consistent with documented investigations. Certain descriptions corresponded with recovered victims and established facts. On the other hand, the book also included numerous claims that could not be independently confirmed, because Gaskins had already demonstrated a tendency to exaggerate or alter aspects of his confessions. Many experts concluded that the autobiography should be viewed as neither entirely truthful nor entirely fictional. Instead, it represented a complicated mixture of verified events, personal interpretation, and possible self-mythologizing. This ambiguity contributed significantly to Gaskins' enduring reputation. Readers unfamiliar with the investigative records sometimes accepted every claim in the book as historical fact. Investigators who had worked directly on the case knew the reality was far more complicated. Throughout the investigation, detectives repeatedly encountered the same central dilemma. Donald Gaskins undeniably possessed genuine knowledge of murders that only the perpetrators should have known. At the same time, he also made statements that resisted verification or appeared inconsistent with available evidence. Every successful excavation increased confidence in part of his testimony while simultaneously making it more difficult to dismiss the unsupported portions entirely. The result was an investigation unlike most homicide cases. Instead of proving or disproving a single confession, detectives found themselves evaluating dozens of separate claims, each requiring its own evidence and each producing its own level of certainty. By the conclusion of this phase, law enforcement had established that Donald Henry Gaskins was responsible for multiple murders supported by physical evidence and corroborated admissions. Yet they had also concluded that his extraordinary claim of more than 100 victims could not be substantiated. The official record therefore reflected a careful balance between accepting documented facts and rejecting unsupported assertions. That distinction remains essential today. Gaskins' notoriety does not rest solely upon the violence he unquestionably committed. It also arises from the uncertainty he deliberately cultivated around his own legacy. Even after detectives had recovered graves, solved disappearances, and secured convictions, one final act of violence still lay ahead. Remarkably, it would not occur in the forests or isolated countryside where so many earlier crimes had taken place. Instead, it would happen inside one of the most secure environments imaginable, a state prison. There, while already serving his sentence, Donald Henry Gaskins would commit the crime that ultimately led the state of South Carolina to seek his execution. By the early 1980s, Donald Henry Gaskins was no longer a free man moving through the rural roads and forests of South Carolina. The investigations into his crimes had led to convictions, and he was serving a life sentence inside a state prison. To many observers, it appeared that the threat he posed to society had finally been contained. The walls surrounding him were designed to separate dangerous offenders from the public, limiting their ability to harm others. For most inmates serving life sentences, prison represents the final chapter of a criminal career. Freedom is gone, opportunities disappear, and violence, while still possible, is heavily restricted by constant supervision and security procedures. Yet Donald Gaskins would demonstrate that confinement alone did not end his capacity for calculated violence. Instead, one of the most extraordinary crimes associated with his name would occur while he was already behind bars. Unlike the murders that investigators had linked to his years outside prison, this killing did not involve isolated forests, hidden graves, or missing persons whose disappearances remained unexplained for years. It occurred inside a correctional institution, under the supervision of prison authorities. More remarkably, it involved a carefully constructed explosive device rather than the guns, knives, blunt objects, or other methods previously associated with Gaskins. The circumstances surrounding this crime were unlike anything investigators had encountered during the earlier phases of his case, and they would ultimately determine how his own life would end. The intended victim was another inmate named Rudolph Tyner. According to the documented account, Tyner was himself a prisoner serving a sentence for murder. The motive behind what happened next did not originate from a spontaneous dispute inside the prison. Instead, the available information indicates that someone outside the prison sought revenge against Tyner. Specifically, a person connected to victims of Tyner's earlier crime arranged for Donald Gaskins to carry out the killing. This transformed the incident into another form of murder for hire, though under circumstances far more unusual than those investigators had previously encountered. The prison environment created obvious obstacles. Firearms were unavailable, movement was restricted, and every inmate lived under varying degrees of supervision. Any successful attack would require planning, patience, and an understanding of how to exploit weaknesses within the institution's routines. According to the evidence presented during subsequent legal proceedings, Gaskins devised an ingenious but deadly solution. He constructed an improvised explosive device disguised to resemble a piece of internal prison communication equipment, specifically something similar to a prison intercom or radio component. The disguise served a simple but devastating purpose. If Tyner believed the object was harmless institutional equipment, he would have little reason to suspect that accepting or operating it placed his life in immediate danger. The success of the plan depended entirely upon deception rather than physical confrontation. At some point, the disguised device reached Rudolph Tyner. Believing it to be what it appeared, he connected it to an electrical outlet. The moment power reached the device, the concealed bomb exploded. The blast killed Tyner instantly. Even within a prison housing individuals convicted of serious crimes, the murder sent shockwaves through both correctional staff and investigators. The idea that one inmate could engineer an explosive device capable of killing another prisoner inside a supposedly secure institution exposed disturbing vulnerabilities. It demonstrated not only determination, but also an ability to adapt criminal methods to circumstances that appeared, at least on the surface, to make such violence impossible. For prison officials, the incident represented a profound security failure. Correctional institutions are designed to prevent inmates from obtaining weapons, coordinating violent attacks, or carrying out sophisticated crimes. The successful construction and delivery of an explosive device challenged assumptions about what incarcerated offenders could accomplish. Investigators therefore examined the circumstances surrounding the bombing with exceptional care. Unlike many earlier cases involving disputed confessions or uncertain victim counts, the essential facts of Tyner's death were supported by the physical evidence created by the explosion itself. This was not a decades-old homicide reconstructed through fragmented memories and recovered remains. It was a contemporary murder committed within one of the state's own institutions. The investigation quickly focused on identifying those responsible for arranging and executing the attack. As evidence accumulated, Donald Gaskins emerged as the central figure. The prosecution argued that he had deliberately constructed the explosive device and intentionally caused Rudolph Tyner's death. Because the killing occurred while Gaskins was already serving a life sentence for previous murders, its legal significance extended far beyond another homicide conviction. South Carolina authorities now possessed a case that would justify seeking the death penalty. The legal proceedings that followed differed in important respects from the earlier murder. Investigations. Previous prosecutions often required reconstructing events that had occurred years before, locating hidden graves, evaluating confessions, and distinguishing documented facts from unsupported claims. In the Tyner case, investigators dealt with a crime occurring inside a controlled environment where physical evidence, prison records, and institutional procedures could be examined directly. The bombing itself left little doubt that a deliberate homicide had taken place. The central issue concerned responsibility for planning and carrying out the attack. Ultimately, the evidence led to Gaskins receiving a death sentence. This punishment was not imposed because of his disputed claims regarding more than 100 victims, nor because of crimes that investigators could never conclusively verify. Instead, it resulted directly from the documented murder of Rudolph Tyner inside prison. Ironically, after years of uncertainty surrounding the true number of people Donald Gaskins had killed, the act that guaranteed his execution became one of the clearest and most thoroughly documented crimes associated with his name. The sentence also carried symbolic significance. Earlier convictions had removed Gaskins from society by imposing life imprisonment. The prison bombing demonstrated that even incarceration had not ended his willingness to commit homicide. From the state's perspective, the murder showed that he continued to represent an extraordinary danger despite already being confined within a maximum security institution. Years passed as the legal process surrounding the death sentence moved forward. During this period, Donald Gaskins remained one of South Carolina's most notorious inmates. His reputation extended beyond the crimes proven in court. Public fascination continued to focus on his extraordinary claims of having murdered more than 100 people. His autobiography, Final Truth, and the unresolved debate over how many victims actually existed. Yet regardless of those controversies, the legal reason for his execution remained straightforward. He had been convicted of murdering Rudolph Tyner while already serving a life sentence. As the date of execution approached, attention increasingly shifted from the questions surrounding Gaskin's past to the certainty of his future. According to the available record, the night before the scheduled execution brought one final unexpected development. Gaskins reportedly attempted to take his own life using a blade he had managed to conceal. Prison staff intervened before the attempt succeeded. The intervention created an unusual situation. Rather than allowing the condemned prisoner to die by suicide, authorities provided medical treatment so that the sentence imposed by the court could be carried out according to law. In effect, the state preserved his life long enough to execute him under the judicial process, rather than permitting him to determine the timing of his own death. The following day, September 6, 1991, Donald Henry Gaskins was escorted to the execution chamber at the South Carolina State Prison. Unlike many condemned inmates who use their final moments to proclaim innocence, apologize to victims' families, or deliver lengthy statements, Gaskins chose a different approach. According to the documented account, he simply indicated that his attorney would speak on his behalf and stated that he was ready. There was no dramatic final confession resolving decades of uncertainty. He offered no definitive clarification regarding the many murders he had claimed over the years. The unanswered questions that had surrounded his criminal career remained unanswered even as he faced death. Moments later, the electric chair ended the life of the man known as Pee Wee Gaskins. Yet while his execution closed the legal proceedings against him, it did not bring closure to the larger mystery. The official record had established multiple murders beyond reasonable doubt. Investigators had recovered victims from locations he identified. Courts had convicted him for documented crimes, including the prison bombing that ultimately led to his execution. At the same time, the extraordinary claim that he had killed more than 100 people remained unsupported by sufficient evidence. His death ensured that many questions would likely never receive definitive answers. Whether he exaggerated to create notoriety, whether additional victims remained undiscovered, or whether the truth lay somewhere between those possibilities became a debate that survived him. The electric chair ended Donald Henry Gaskins' life, but it could not settle the question that had followed him for decades. Where did the truth end, and where did the legend he built around himself begin? The final chapter of this story must therefore examine not only the end of the man, but also the legacy of uncertainty he left behind and the enduring importance of remembering the confirmed victims whose lives were forever overshadowed by the myths surrounding their killer. The execution of Donald Henry Gaskins on September 6, 1991, marked the official end of a criminal career that had troubled South Carolina for decades. A man who had spent much of his life moving between freedom and imprisonment, violence and deception, confession and denial, was finally gone. The state had carried out the sentence imposed by the courts, not because of every crime Gaskins claimed to have committed, but because of the murders that could be proven beyond reasonable doubt. His death brought a legal conclusion to one of the most controversial criminal cases in American history. However, it did not provide complete answers. The central mystery that had surrounded Donald Gaskins throughout his final years remained unresolved. How many people had he actually killed? The number he provided himself was shocking. Gaskins claimed responsibility for more than 100 murders. In some accounts, he suggested a total exceeding 100 victims, a number that, if true, would place him among the most prolific serial killers ever identified in the United States. Yet investigators never accepted this figure as fact. Their responsibility was not to repeat the claims of a convicted murderer, but to determine what could be supported by evidence. Through searches, interviews, recovered remains, and investigations into missing persons cases, authorities confirmed only a much smaller number of victims. The difference between Gaskin's statements and the official record became the defining controversy. Of his legacy, understanding Donald Gaskins requires recognizing that two separate stories existed at the same time. The first was the documented criminal case, a man convicted of multiple murders, connected to recovered victims, and ultimately executed after killing another inmate inside prison. The second was the story Gaskins told about himself, a larger-than-life figure who claimed to have committed countless murders across South Carolina and who portrayed himself as one of the most dangerous killers in American history. The difficulty was that Gaskins had deliberately placed himself at the center of both narratives. He provided information that helped investigators uncover real crimes, but he also made claims that could not be verified. He was simultaneously a source of evidence and a source of confusion. This contradiction shaped nearly every discussion of his case after his death. For investigators and criminal researchers, the confirmed victims remained the most important part of the story. These were not numbers. They were individuals whose lives had existed independently of Donald Gaskins. They had families, relationships, personal histories, and futures that were taken away. Their identities became especially important because Gaskins' own reputation often overshadowed the people he killed. The focus on the offender, his personality, and his claims sometimes risked pushing the victims into the background. Yet the confirmed cases revealed the true human cost of his actions more clearly than any of his exaggerated statements ever could. The deaths of Janice Kirby and Patricia Allsbrook demonstrated the vulnerability of young victims who disappeared before their families understood what had happened. The murder of Martha and Dix reflected the difficulty investigators faced when dealing with Gaskins' inconsistent explanations. The deaths of Doreen Dempsey and her young daughter showed the extreme cruelty involved when innocent individuals became victims of his violence. Dennis Bellamy's case illustrated another recurring pattern. People who became connected to Gaskins through friendship, money, or criminal activity could eventually become targets themselves. These victims represented the reality behind the investigation. They were the evidence that mattered most. While the number of victims remained uncertain, the confirmed crimes revealed a disturbing pattern. Donald Gaskins did not limit himself to one type of victim or one method of killing. His victims included people close to him and people whose lives intersected with his only briefly. His methods varied, and his motives changed depending on the circumstances. Sometimes violence appeared connected to money. Sometimes it involved eliminating someone who knew too much. Sometimes, according to his own descriptions, it involved a desire for control. This unpredictability made him particularly difficult for investigators to understand. There was no simple explanation that could account for every crime. He was not defined by one motive, one victim type, or one method. Instead, the common element was the offender himself. Another lasting controversy involved Gaskins' autobiography, Final Truth, written with Wilton Earl while he was imprisoned. The book attracted significant attention because it provided readers with Gaskins' own account of his childhood, crimes, and personal beliefs. For some, it became an important document offering insight into the mind of a violent offender. For others, it was viewed with suspicion because Gaskins had clear reasons to portray himself in a particular way. A convicted murderer describing his own crimes is never a neutral source. Every statement must be examined through the possibility of exaggeration, manipulation, or an attempt to create a lasting reputation. The book contained details consistent with known facts, but it also repeated claims that investigators could not confirm. As a result, Final Truth became both a source of information and another example of the uncertainty surrounding Gaskins. The debate over the number of victims also raised broader questions about how society understands serial killers. Public attention often focuses on the most extreme claims. A statement such as more than 100 victims creates immediate fascination because of its scale. Yet numbers alone do not represent the full reality of a crime. Each victim represents a separate tragedy, regardless of whether the final count is 9, 15, or 100. The danger of focusing only on the offender's reputation is that it can transform real suffering into a statistic. The Gaskins case serves as a reminder that criminal investigations are ultimately about establishing truth, not creating legends. Over the years, different theories emerged about why Gaskins claimed so many murders. Some believed he was attempting to build a reputation as one of history's most notorious killers. Others suggested that he may have committed additional crimes that were never discovered. The available evidence supports neither complete acceptance nor complete rejection of all his claims. It is possible that additional victims existed. Rural areas, missing persons cases, and the passage of time can make investigations extremely difficult. However, the specific number of additional victims remains unknown because claims without evidence cannot become established facts. This uncertainty is one of the reasons the Gaskins case continues to attract attention decades after his execution. Unlike cases where investigators uncover every detail, his story remains incomplete. There are confirmed crimes. There are disputed confessions. There are recovered remains. There are also unanswered questions that may never be resolved. The uncertainty itself became part of the legacy he left behind. Yet perhaps the most important conclusion from the Gaskins case is not the question of whether he killed dozens more people than investigators could prove. The more important lesson is how long violence can remain hidden when offenders exploit isolation, fear, and the trust of others. Gaskins was able to continue his crimes for years because many victims disappeared in circumstances that did not immediately reveal a connection. Some lived on society's margins. Others were connected to him personally and never imagined that someone they knew could become their killer. The investigation eventually exposed him, but only after many lives had already been lost. The case also demonstrated the importance of careful investigation. Authorities did not simply accept every confession Gaskins offered, nor did they dismiss him entirely because some claims appeared exaggerated. They examined evidence, searched locations, recovered remains, and built conclusions based on what could be proven. This distinction between evidence and speculation remains essential in any criminal investigation. A suspect's own words can reveal truth, but they can also create confusion. The responsibility of investigators is to determine which is which. Donald Henry Gaskins died in the electric chair, but the questions surrounding him survived. His confirmed crimes remain among the most disturbing cases in South Carolina's history. His unverified claims continue to fuel debate. His autobiography continues to be studied and questioned. His victims continue to represent the human cost behind a name that became infamous. The story of Pee Wee Gaskins is therefore not simply the story of a killer. It is also the story of an investigation, a legal system attempting to establish truth, and families seeking answers about loved ones who never returned. The final truth about Donald Henry Gaskins may never be completely known, but what is known is enough to understand the devastation he caused and the importance of remembering the victims whose lives were taken long before the man responsible became a name in criminal history. The name Donald Henry Gaskins has remained one of the most controversial names in American true crime history, not only because of the murders connected to him, but because of the uncertainty that continues to surround his story. Unlike some criminal cases where investigators eventually establish a complete timeline, identify every victim, and provide clear answers, the Gaskins case remains divided between confirmed facts and unresolved claims. His crimes were real, his convictions were real, and the suffering experienced by his victims was undeniable. Yet the image he created of himself after his arrest became almost as powerful as the crimes themselves. Over time, the man and the legend became difficult to separate. Understanding the legacy of Pee Wee Gaskins requires looking beyond the sensational aspects of his story and focusing on the evidence. the victims, and the unanswered questions that remain decades after his execution. The most important distinction in evaluating Gaskin's legacy is the difference between what investigators proved and what Gaskins himself claimed. During his lifetime, he presented himself as a murderer responsible for more than 100 deaths. That number became one of the most repeated facts associated with his name, but it was never established through official investigations. Law enforcement agencies responsible for examining his confessions treated each claim individually. They looked for physical evidence, recovered remains, witness testimony, and connections to missing persons cases. Some of his statements led investigators to genuine discoveries. Others could not be supported. This created a complicated picture. Gaskins was clearly responsible for multiple murders, but the full scale of his violence remained uncertain. The temptation to focus on the largest possible number often overshadowed the more important reality. Even the confirmed victims represented a devastating pattern of violence that affected numerous families. Whether the final number was 9, 15, or another figure supported by future discoveries, each victim represented a complete human life destroyed. They were not merely names in a criminal file or evidence used during a trial. They were sons, daughters, relatives, and friends whose absence changed the lives of those who knew them. The investigation into Donald Gaskins became a search for answers, but for the families of victims, it was also a search for peace after unimaginable loss. One of the most disturbing aspects of the Gaskins case was the way he manipulated the attention surrounding him. Criminal investigators and researchers have long recognized that some offenders attempt to control the narrative of their crimes by confessing selectively, exaggerating details, or presenting themselves as more powerful than they truly are. They can influence how the public remembers them. Gaskins appeared to understand the power of his own story. His claims of more than 100 murders, his descriptions of hidden victims, and his cooperation with writer Wilton Earl for the book Final Truth all contributed to an image of himself as an almost mythical criminal figure. However, the more closely investigators examined his statements, the clearer it became that his own words could not always be trusted. The book itself became a symbol of this contradiction. On one hand, Final Truth contained information about Gaskin's childhood, criminal activity, and some documented murders. It provided insight into how he wanted others to understand him. On the other hand, it also contained claims that could not be verified. The book, therefore, became another piece of evidence requiring careful examination rather than a complete record of historical fact. Readers could learn about Gaskin's perspective, but they could not assume that every statement represented reality. This distinction became increasingly important as his story entered popular culture. Public fascination with serial killers often creates a risk. The offender becomes more memorable than the victims. The criminal's personality, methods, and psychology receive extensive attention, while the people harmed by their actions become secondary. The case of Donald Gaskins demonstrates why that imbalance can be dangerous. His notoriety grew partly because of the extraordinary claims he made about himself. But the real significance of the case lies in the lives that were taken. The confirmed victims deserve recognition not because they were connected to a famous criminal, but because they existed as individuals long before their names appeared in an investigation file. The victims of Gaskins came from different backgrounds and circumstances. Some were young. Some were connected to him personally. Some became involved through relationships that turned dangerous. Their circumstances varied, but they shared one tragic similarity. They encountered someone capable of extreme violence. The fact that Gaskins could move between different types of victims made him especially difficult to understand. There was no single category that explained his actions. He did not limit himself to strangers, nor did he only target people with criminal connections. His victims were connected by opportunity and circumstance rather than a simple pattern. This unpredictability increased the difficulty of preventing future crimes during the years he remained free. Another significant part of Gaskin's legacy was the murder he committed while already imprisoned. The killing of Rudolph Tyner changed the legal consequences of his crimes permanently. Before that event, Gaskins was already serving a life sentence for documented murders. Many believe that imprisonment had removed him from the possibility of further violence. However, the prison bombing demonstrated that his capacity for planning and committing murder continued even within a controlled environment. The case became a powerful example of how dangerous individuals can remain capable of violence, despite physical confinement. It also created the legal basis for his eventual execution. Unlike the disputed claims involving additional victims, the murder of Rudolph Tyner was a crime with clear evidence and direct consequences. It represented the final documented act that ended Gaskin's ability to harm another person. The execution that followed in 1991 closed the criminal proceedings but did not resolve every question. The mystery surrounding the true number of victims remained. Investigators, journalists, and researchers continued examining the available information, but the passage of time created significant obstacles. Memories faded. Evidence became more difficult to locate. Some possible victims may have disappeared without records that could establish a connection. At the same time, accepting every claim made by Gaskins would create another problem, allowing a convicted murderer to define history through statements that may have been designed partly for attention. The most responsible approach remained the same one investigators used during his lifetime: believe evidence, not simply claims. Looking back at the entire case, Donald Henry Gaskins represents a complicated example of the relationship between criminal reality and criminal mythology. The reality is that he committed multiple murders, concealed victims, manipulated investigators, and continued violence even after imprisonment. The mythology is the larger image of himself that he created through extraordinary claims and public attention. The two became intertwined, making it difficult for many people to separate the actual offender from the character he presented to the world. Yet history should ultimately remember him through facts rather than through the image he attempted to construct. The confirmed evidence is disturbing enough without exaggeration. The lives lost are enough to understand the seriousness of his crimes. The families affected are enough to demonstrate the lasting consequences of his actions. The legacy of Donald Henry Gaskins is therefore not defined by whether he truly killed 100 people or whether that number was an invention. His legacy is defined by the victims whose deaths were proven, the communities affected by his crimes, and the investigative efforts that revealed the truth hidden beneath years of uncertainty. In the end, the most important lesson from the Pee Wee Gaskins case is that behind every notorious criminal name are real people whose stories deserve to be remembered. The attention given to offenders may last for decades, but the victims are the ones who paid the ultimate price. Their lives, not the killer's reputation, should remain at the center of the story. As the years continue to pass, some questions about Donald Gaskins may never be answered, but the responsibility to acknowledge what is known remains unchanged. The truth may be incomplete, but it is still powerful enough to reveal the consequences of violence and the importance of seeking justice for those who can no longer speak for themselves. The story of Donald Henry Gaskins ends with a question that may never receive a complete answer. How many people did he actually kill? It is a question that has followed his name since the moment he began telling investigators about crimes that stretched far beyond the murders already known. Gaskins claimed responsibility for more than 100 deaths. His statements created the image of a criminal unlike any other, a man who had spent decades moving through South Carolina, leaving behind countless victims. Yet when investigators examined his claims, they found a much more complicated reality. Some confessions were supported by evidence. Some led to the recovery of remains. Some matched known disappearances. Others could not be verified. In the end, the number of victims that can be proven remains far smaller than the number Gaskins claimed. But the uncertainty surrounding the total number does not diminish the seriousness of the crimes that were established. The documented record alone reveals a man responsible for profound suffering and irreversible loss. Donald Henry Gaskins was not remembered because of a single crime or a single moment. His criminal history developed over many years, beginning with violence and criminal behavior during his youth and continuing through adulthood. His life demonstrated a pattern of repeated offending, manipulation, and disregard for the lives of others. From early acts of theft and violence to the murders that eventually made him infamous, Gaskins repeatedly crossed boundaries that most people recognize as impossible to cross. Each crime represented another step away from ordinary human connection and another tragedy for the people caught in his path. The victims remained the most important part of this story, even though the attention surrounding Gaskins often focused on him. Their lives existed before the crimes. They had identities, relationships, hopes, and futures. They were not simply evidence in a criminal investigation or names associated with a notorious offender. They were people whose lives mattered. The investigations into Gaskins' crimes revealed only part of the suffering he caused, but that part was enough to show the devastating impact of his actions. The murders of Janice Kirby and Patricia Allsbrook showed how vulnerable young people could become when placed in a situation with someone they trusted or knew. The death of Martha and Dix demonstrated the difficulty investigators faced when trying to determine the truth behind Gaskins' changing explanations. The murder of Doreen Dempsey and her 2-year-old daughter represented one of the most heartbreaking examples of the cruelty connected to his crimes. Dennis Bellamy's death showed that even people who considered Gaskins a friend could become victims when conflict or financial issues emerged. These individuals were not part of a legend. They were real people whose lives were permanently taken away. The investigation into Donald Gaskins also provided important lessons about the challenges of dealing with offenders who attempt to control their own narrative. Gaskins understood that information created power. By deciding what to reveal, what to exaggerate, and what to keep hidden, he influenced how others viewed him. His confessions were both useful and problematic. They helped investigators locate some victims, but they also forced detectives to question every statement carefully. A confession from a murderer cannot automatically be accepted as truth. It must be tested against evidence. This principle became essential in the Gaskins investigation because his words contained both confirmed information and claims that remained unsupported. The distinction between truth and exaggeration became central to understanding who Donald Gaskins really was. Was he a man responsible for more than 100 murders, as he claimed? Or was he a murderer who expanded his crimes through storytelling to increase his reputation? The answer may never be fully known. What is clear is that he understood the power of fear and notoriety. His claims ensured that his name would continue to attract attention long after his death. However, the danger of focusing too heavily on the legend is that it can unintentionally give the offender exactly what he wanted: recognition. The victims, rather than the killer's image, should remain the center of the story. The final years of Gaskins' life also revealed another important aspect of his character. Even after imprisonment, even after receiving a life sentence, he remained capable of planning and carrying out murder. The killing of Rudolph Tyner inside prison was not a crime committed during a moment of uncontrolled emotion. It involved preparation and deception. Gaskins created an explosive device disguised as ordinary prison equipment, and the attack resulted in Tyner's death. This act became the final documented crime that led to his execution. It demonstrated that confinement had not removed his willingness to use violence. For authorities, the murder confirmed that he remained in extraordinary danger even while incarcerated. The execution of Donald Henry Gaskins in 1991 brought a legal end to the case. The state of South Carolina carried out the sentence imposed by the courts. Yet execution could not answer every question. It It could not reveal whether additional victims remained undiscovered. It could not confirm every confession he had made. It could not undo the suffering experienced by families who lost loved ones. The electric chair ended Gaskin's life, but it did not erase the consequences of his actions. The families affected by his crimes continued living with the memories of those they lost. Justice could provide accountability, but it could not restore what had been taken. Over time, the Gaskins case became an example of why criminal investigations must rely on evidence rather than reputation. A person can become famous for what they claim to have done, but history must separate statements from facts. Investigators who worked on the case understood this distinction. They followed leads, examined evidence, searched locations, and confirmed what they could. They did not ignore his confessions, but they also did not accept every word without proof. Their work created a record based on reality rather than mythology. This approach remains important in studying the case today. The fascination surrounding Donald Gaskins also reflects a broader challenge in true crime: how to discuss terrible crimes without allowing the offender to become the main character. Stories about serial killers often attract attention because of their unusual behavior, psychological complexity, or the scale of their crimes. But every criminal case begins with victims, not offenders. The purpose of examining such cases should not be to glorify the person responsible. It should be to understand what happened, recognize the harm caused, and remember those who were lost. The case of Pee Wee Gaskins serves as a reminder that behind every investigation file are human lives. Behind every recovered body is a family that experienced grief. Behind every missing person report is someone who was loved and remembered. The facts of the case are disturbing enough without the need for exaggeration. The confirmed crimes alone reveal a pattern of violence that destroyed families and communities. The unresolved questions may continue to interest researchers, but they should never overshadow the victims whose stories deserve recognition. In the decades since his execution, Donald Henry Gaskins has remained a controversial figure because his story exists between certainty and uncertainty. Some facts are undeniable. He was convicted of multiple murders. He was connected to recovered victims. He killed Rudolph Tyner inside prison. He was executed for his crimes. Other aspects remain unresolved. The true number of victims may never be known. Some claims may have contained elements of truth. Others may have existed only as part of the identity he created for himself. The final truth about Donald Henry Gaskins is therefore not a simple number or a single explanation. It is a collection of verified crimes, unanswered questions, and the lasting impact on those who suffered because of his actions. His story does not end with the man known as Pee Wee Gaskins. It ends with the people whose lives were changed forever, the victims who cannot speak for themselves, the families who carried the pain long after the headlines disappeared, the investigators who searched for answers in places where others had failed to look, and the reminder that even when the full truth is impossible to recover, the pursuit of truth remains essential. Donald Henry Gaskins wanted to be remembered as a figure larger than life. But the most meaningful way to remember this case is not through the image he created. It is through the reality left behind, lives lost, justice pursued, and the importance of never allowing the victims to disappear behind the shadow of the person who harmed them.